Hello and welcome to Pros and Convos with me, Steve Yeo. What I'll be doing each week is I will be talking to authors from all over the world. Some you may know, some you may not know. Indie published authors and traditionally published authors, playwrights, poets, and hopefully we'll have something for everybody. And also I'll be talking with the authors and trying to get to the bottom of some of the lessons they learn as writers. So if you're a new writer out there, or if you're just an avid reader and want to hear about a new book that's out, then stay tuned. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Pros and Convos. I'm today speaking to sci-fi author Robert Starling. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Steve.
Tell me, Robert, before we get into your books and all that, give us a little bit of background about yourself. Where do you live and what is your background before writing?
I live in Bristol, and my background in writing before writing was I'm a guitar player. I hate to say musician, producer, songwriter, bits of all that really. I've played in a variety of bands, anything from a duo to a six-piece band, anything from pop music to what people would say is heavy rock. And I'm sort of semi-retired from that, or almost completely retired from that, whichever way you look at it. I decided when I retired, I had something in my head, and being creative, I wanted to sort of get it out. So I decided that I would try and get it down and see where it went.
Ah. So, and also I should just say, talking about your producing, your writing and songwriting and all the rest of it, I should let the listeners know that it was Robert that produced all the sound bites and the intros and outros for all the competitions and that you're hearing during this podcast. So thank you very much for doing that for me, Rob.
I see that you repurposed a few things from the past.
Yes, well, they actually sounded so much better in this one than what we originally did them for.
Oh, well,
but there we go. Okay, let's get into your books then. You've got what I would call a sci-fi series. It didn't start that way though, did it?
No, it would have just remained as one book, but the publisher asked for a sequel, and it seems like the publishing business is very much like the music business. Is there promises and things that just don't pan out? But I never intended to actually write a sequel. I left the book a little bit with an ending, not an ending.
It was a big cliffhanger. It could have been seen as a cliffhanger.
Yeah,
couldn't it?
if you can imagine something similar to the original Planet of the Apes, where they walk along the beach and see like the Statue of Liberty stuck out of the sand, and then they end the film and you think, well, is that an ending or isn't it? So you can take it two ways, but I never intended to write a second book until I was asked.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, why not? Although I'd painted myself into a bit of a corner, I didn't. Once I thought about it, it didn't really stress me out, and I think I worked a way out of it quite easily. I'd left myself enough wiggle room that I wanted to, wherever I wanted to go.
So let's tell us about this first one then. Under the Mountain is what it's called. Tell us about some of your characters. You've got Sil, Marco, Arnold.
Okay, although Marco is the instigator of the story, he's not really the main character. Or as it pans out, I mean, the main character really is Arnold. He's the one that comes to the forefront. If I sort of tell you a little bit about the character, so Marco's he's a failed career criminal.
Yeah.
I mean, he's more unlucky than anything. Things just don't pan out for him. And it's the same with the beginning of the book. But Arnold he's like an ex-scientist who got thrown into the trash by the government while working Area 51. So there's the beginning of the book sees Marco trying to do another one of his, sort of robberies. Again, it goes wrong. He ends up in a police chase in a massive electrical storm, and due to a freak accident, he ends up discovering a tunnel which leads to a cavern which is populated by a huge metallic platform with 6 smaller platforms and 5 UFOs on. He explores the UFOs, finds bodies in there, and he finds that they're loads of strange symbols. And as he sort of sits down trying to take it all in, he thinks he can remember seeing some of these symbols before. And he sort of, in his head, he works out that he used to go to this bar and they used to play late night poker. One of the guys got drunk, which turns out to be Arnold. He'd tell him all stories about how he used to work at Area 51. And one time he drew some of these symbols on a napkin, and Marco decided, in his inquisitive nature, to keep hold of it. So when he sort of comes away from the cavern, he looks for this napkin and finds it, and he sees some of the same symbols on it. So he thinks, well, Arnold is the guy to look for. So he searches him out, and at first Arnold is vigorously opposed to this. He doesn't want anything to do with it. But Marco, trying to show a bit of maturity, bides his time and goes back because he thinks, well, this is probably the greatest scientific discovery of the century. Why wouldn't he want to be involved in it? So eventually he recruits Arnold to help him use some of the remaining UFOs for nefarious projects.
I mean, having read the book, I love the way that later on in the story, whether people believe it or not, the crash that happened in Nevada that started everything off. You've carefully sort of weeded that into your story as well.
I've tried to incorporate bits of like UFO mythology and such to try and, because obviously when I say there are 6 platforms and 5 UFOs, obviously the one that's missing is the one from Roswell, and in the book it didn't actually crash; it was shot down by.
We'll leave something for the reader.
Yeah, okay. So that's how the book starts off, and then they try and Marco tries to recruit somebody he was in prison with, and at first when he propositions the guy, he doesn't mention anything about the UFOs, but he mentions, and the guy laughs at him, and he says, I'm sorry, but it's a joke. But they decided, the two of them together decide to do a robbery, and it is so off the books that it is straight in the papers because nobody can explain it. And by the time Marco gets back to his apartment, the phone's ringing, and it's Sil saying, I want in. So as the story progresses, you see that Arnold basically becomes the father figure, and it sort of becomes a story of a dysfunctional family. And Arnold he's a scientist, he's not a criminal, and he wants to look after the two of them, but he also wants a bit of payback for the way he was treated by the government. So what they do seems to get more and more outlandish and outrageous to sort of try and expose the cover-up of alien existence. And you've got the military and the FBI trying to track them down and trying to stop any of the stories from coming out. Arnold, he spent his whole life in education. He was a college teacher and a university teacher, and then recruited by the military to work at Area 51. So he's never had any romantic inclinations, but his trips to the library researching stuff for them to do, he finds he's very attracted to the head librarian in the library, and she's attracted to him. So towards the end of the story, he becomes sort of the surrogate father to the other two, and she becomes a sort of mother figure, really.
So the family is complete.
It's another amazing literary fact.
The first written works are thought to have been created between 7000 and 4000 BC. The earliest surviving written literature is from ancient Mesopotamia, and the most complete version of the Epic of Gilgamesh is believed to have been written on clay tablets between 1500 and 1200 BC.
That was another amazing literary fact.
Yeah, I've read the first book, Under the Mountain, and I thought it was great. I really did enjoy the book. Well, I said to you, didn't I? I had to get in touch with you and let you know how much I enjoyed it. Now, the second book, Out of Time, is the follow-on, the one that you didn't want to write, but because your publisher asked you to write it, with false promises and whatever else. Tell us about that one then. How did you manage to pick that one up? Because that focuses more on Martha, doesn't it?
It focuses on basically the end of what you find out is in the second book that they've been placed in suspended animation by the aliens whose spacecraft they found, and they were basically stuck in a shared reality. But you see in this shared reality, things start adding up, and they actually start to realise that something isn't right, and they manage to get their way out of. They're in these big sort of glass type tubes, all interconnected, but they sort of manage to wake themselves up and break out of it. But when they get to the end of the tunnel back, they find that things aren't as they were. And in the second book, you find out they've been stuck in these tubes for 80 years, or almost 80 years, and Earth isn't the same. There's big winds and huge dust clouds everywhere. They look out on the city, which is Phoenix in Arizona, and basically a lot of it is completely different. Obviously high rise, but there's sort of in disrepair and a wreck. But they see one building rising high above the others, so they know that they've got to try and make their way because obviously they got no food, no water, so they need to get there and see what they can find. So they work their way across basically what is the sort of desert through the dust and everything, and they manage to get to this tower, and they find out that it's been left by the aliens that put them in suspended animation, but the Earth has suffered. Basically, virtually all the population has been exterminated by this other alien race that came to Earth. There's been a big battle in space between the two alien races, and the moon has been cut in half, basically, by these alien weapons, and basically is going to career into the Earth. So the Earth is basically doomed.
Yeah.
But inside this building, the aliens left this supercomputer to help if there are any other survivors and alert them to come back and pick them up and take them away from Earth. And she tells them that the aliens, the other alien race, had stolen a time device that is in development, and they came to Earth looking for a rare element to power it, because the Earth is obviously full of, is very rich in minerals and elements, but they got cut off trying to get away with it. So the supercomputer tells them that there's a crashed ship with possibly the time drive and some of the element need to power it in the desert. They go to the ship to try and find it, and they've got to fight their way through these fearsome creatures that the aliens have left, because Arnold is desperate, because he knows now that Martha, who was his soulmate, is dead because it's been so long, and he thinks if there's one chance in a million that I can find a way back to her. That is what I want to do. And although it doesn't seem like a secondary thing, he wants to obviously save the Earth as well. So the second book is their quest to get the time drive, find the element and successfully get back and basically change the past.
Yeah. Oh, I must admit I did enjoy the second one as well. I haven't read your third one, but your third one, your latest release called Beyond the Dark Mirror. So I generally know nothing about this one. So where does it pick up in the story with everything now?
Well, it picks up, all the books literally run together. The second the first one finishes, I've started from basically that, and so where the second one finishes, I've started the third one. So the trouble is you end up giving away too many things. But basically, Arnold asked each of them in the first book what they actually wanted, because he said they didn't. Even though they are criminals, they don't. They basically feel hard done by, because each one of them has lost something. Arnold's lost something. He was an academic and he had that basically pulled away from him by the government. He was bitter about that. Marco lost his mother when he was very, very young to cancer, and his dad, trying to make ends meet, ends up turning to crime, and because Marco idolised him, that's why he turned to crime. Syl was a victim of the foster system and never believed he had anybody to love him. So they've all lost something. So Marco asked them what they wanted, and they told him what they all wanted. But when, at the end of the second book, they actually get what they wanted, they find out he gives them enough rope to say, well, you wanted to do this, but there's a difference in having, say, a hobby and doing it 7 days a week. And they all felt overworked and trapped by it. So in the third book, he says, well, we've got the most powerful machine in the world. And, we can do whatever we want. You've started up businesses, but you can let other people run those, and we can just go off and have adventures. So you find out that in the third book, they've actually changed the past. So basically, it's like a different reality. It's a different version. Not that they know it. And they start by they decide they're going to go treasure hunting, even though they don't need the money. But they decide that they'll it's like an adventure. They'll just keep one piece of treasure each from their adventures, from each adventure as a memento, and they'll basically give away the rest because they don't really need the money. But they find out that the FBI and the military are still engaged in finding them, and eventually the military, the FBI track them down, and the military come for them, but they're ready for them, and they sort of turn the tables on them. But they need to do other things to sort of make things right, and they try and do that in the first half of the book, and then they decide they're going to go back to treasure hunting again. They decide that they're going to go into the Bermuda Triangle because that's where there's so many shipwrecks. And when they go into the Bermuda Triangle and they go diving, they find all these wrecks that have been going down for like 1,000 years or more. But in each one of them, there's sections of the ships and planes they're completely missing. And while they're down there, there's this sudden disturbance. And basically, it pulls one of them through into what is going to be into another dimension, another part of the multiverse. And they find that part of this beam that comes through is an SOS signal. So they track the SOS, and they find stuck in the middle of the Peruvian jungle what looks like an ancient temple, but is in fact an alien base that's been abandoned for over 1,000 years. And in it they find the technology that will help them travel through the multiverse and so they've got to go and look for Marco in the multiverse. So, but it's sort of not like it's not like Back to the Future where you just set a time and a date,
Yeah.
and it'll take you there. It's very random, so they've got to travel randomly through different versions of Earth until they find Marco's signal. And in that place, the Earth is completely different. It's populated by huge, monstrous creatures, and the human race, what it is, has developed underground. So and while they're there, they find that not only is Marco there, but another Marco from another universe has been pulled there. So they try to track them down, and eventually they find them, and they're obviously finding them and then finding their way home.
Well, yeah, I think you've more than whet my appetite for the last book in this series, and I highly recommend everybody has a look at the 3 books. The 3 books being Under the Mountain, the second one Out of Time, and the third one Beyond the Dark Mirror. Well, Bob, thanks for spending this time with us. Well, we're going to take a short break now, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about the writing side of writing.
It's competition.
Competition is competition time.
To win yourself one of Robert Starling's books, all you have to do is send an email to proseandconvos@hotmail.com, proseandconvos@hotmail.com, and if you're subscribed to our channel, we will put you in the draw.
It's competition.
Competition is competition time.
So you've got 3 books published. Has it all been plain sailing?
Pretty much. I the first book, I had an idea, and it wasn't a story. It was just the beginning of a story, and I think it could have gone anyway. But I just sat down one day, got my laptop out, and I wrote the bit that I had in my head, and then everything else sort of appeared in my head as I thought, how does the story go now? And it was like a movie sort of playing out in my head.
Yeah.
Probably a very cheap movie, but that's what it was like. And every day I didn't ever sit down, open my laptop when I decided I would write and not write. I never once sat there for half an hour with a cup of coffee thinking, where do we go from here?
Oh, so you haven't suffered with writer's block then?
No, never. Not one thing. Every time I sat down and decided to write, I wrote. I looked at this, what the story was, and I thought to myself, this is how it's going to go now. I've never written anything down, never sort of structured anything. I've just gone where my head tells me. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. And I am a novice at this.
Are you what I call a pantser, whereas you start writing and just see where the story takes you, or do you meticulously plan every chapter you're going to write?
I'm a pantser. I don't plan anything. I go where I think I should go at the time. I just work I'm flying by the seat of my pants. I just see where the story is, and I think, how can I advance the story? How can I try and bring things in and make it interesting? In the third book, before I wrote it, I did have an idea of what I wanted, of a thing I wanted to put in there for part of the story, which I used. But that was, I think, the only time that I had an actual idea of something to go in the book before I wrote it. And I thought, yeah, I think that would be a good place to go, and hopefully would make it sort of interesting. But the rest of the books are basically, I just sat down, opened my laptop, thought in my head, how will the story go? And it just went. And I just wrote what I thought, and then I'd go back a month later, look at it and thinking, I'll change this bit and I'll change that bit. And obviously, if I had to write the first book again now, if I had to go through it, I think there's lots of little bits I'd probably, make it a little bit less clunky because it's my first book. And basically, I'd never written anything for almost 50 years. I keep using the adage, the longest thing I wrote since I left school was a shopping list. And that's basically the truth. And I've never written anything. And this, you go from nothing to trying to write 80,000 words. It's quite a big thing, and My wife laughed at me when I told her I was going to write a book. I mean, she said, "Yeah, of course you are," and just left it at that. But I didn't feel any pressure to write anything. I just thought, oh, I'll do a bit of writing today. Got my laptop out, carried on. And the ideas, like you say about writer's block, didn't ever have any of that. I probably, like I said, I would change bits of dialogue. But the stories, basically, no. I don't think I'd change the stories. I think I've tried to make. I think they've got enough things to make them interesting, enough things to make them a bit different. There's not huge alien invasions. Well, maybe a little bit here and there, but enough to make them different. I mean, I watch a lot of TV. I watch a lot of movies. I've seen a lot of sci-fi movies, and I just thought, well, that was sad. And I'm hoping they're better than that.
Yeah.
But I can't be the judge of it. It's like anything. You need to interact with other people to get people's opinion, and you want people's honest opinion.
Yeah.
That I think if it's like anything, it's like driving with your face against the windshield. You can't see anything because you're too close to it. And you can't sit there with a smug look on your face thinking, oh, that's brilliant. You really need constructive criticism from people.
Yeah.
You don't need people to come and pat you on the back and say, well done, if they don't mean it. You want people to say, oh, yeah, the story was really good. Well, don't you think that might not work, or that's a little bit out of character? That's the thing that you need. You need people to come in and say, I really enjoyed it, but I don't think that actually works very well. And if you can take that on board, because constructive criticism can only make your work better.
Yeah, I agree.
That's what I think. It's like I like everything. I mean, before this, the last thing I did was I recorded an album, and I co-wrote all the songs. I recorded it, engineered it, produced it, or at least co-produced it. I asked a friend of mine who had 40 years plus experience as an engineer producer, and he came over and went, yeah, that's great. Well, do you think that could be, do you think that would work there if you did this? And gave me some constructive feedback. And at the end of the day, I took that on board, and I think, it just little things just make stuff better. He can see what you can. And I think I gave the last book to my friend who lives in Marietta, which is just north of Atlanta in Georgia. And he read through it, and he came back with a couple of things, said, I think you've done this in great detail and you've glossed over this a little bit. Don't you think you could elaborate on that? And I went, fair enough. And he said, oh, and I think this bit here is out of character for the character. I think, you should look at it. And I did, and I changed it because they were all valid points that I didn't immediately see. Yeah. Or would I have ever seen, because, like I said, being too close to it.
Yeah.
But
any lessons you learned on the way? Any piece of advice you can give anybody? I know grammar was a big thing for you, wasn't it? Starting off.
Well, yeah. I mean, you really laid into that. Yeah, you said the story's good, the grammar's awful, and I can't help but agree with you, because I got no experience of writing. Like I said, 3 pounds of potatoes and 2 tins of carrots doesn't make a story. There's no grammatical errors in that, but I hope I've improved over the time. I've still taken advice from a couple of my friends, let them read through things, and if they find anything they like grammatically that they're much more in tune with than I am, I can take it on board, rewrite little sections and try and put it right. So I've learned that, but then that's a lesson in my inadequacy.
Well, we all have inadequate. We all have failures in different areas. I mean, my biggest failure is I don't seem to go into enough detail a lot of the time, and I have to go back and think, okay, yeah, it's not a table, it's a white table with legs, and just to.
The one thing I did do, because I'm not a great reader, I virtually don't read at all. While I was writing the first book, I thought about the characters. I borrowed from my niece. I borrowed the first Harry Potter book, and I read that, and I looked at how she described her characters, and I thought, well, they're no more detailed than mine. You know, they don't really tell you, well, in the first book, whether she elaborates over a series of books, but I didn't think she actually went into any more detail about the characters than I did. So, but that was the one thing I thought, oh, and probably now, if I was going to write another book, I would get a few books by obviously respected authors. I mean, I've read your first book.
Thank you. Yes, I know.
And do that. Spend a bit of time reading and getting the feel for how these. It's not just for trying to. It's just for, if I write another book, I'd like it to be as good or better than these three. And you know, the content, and maybe I can find a way they've either structured the story or structured the characters. It's just maturity. It's like everything. If you're creative, but creativity is an ongoing process, and it's like songwriting. If you look back on the first song you wrote and the last song you wrote, and they're basically the same quality, you're not learning anything. Yeah. If you've been playing an instrument for 20 years and you look back on something you played 20 years ago and thinking, I couldn't have played that any better, then you haven't gone anywhere. It's just looking at everything as an ongoing process. And you think, if I wrote another book, where would I go? What would I do? I mean, do I reuse the characters I've already got? Do I do a completely different sort of genre? It's something you need to be. I think science fiction gives you like a free pass to sort of just freely use your imagination. I've said you got to suspend belief, because otherwise there's no point. I did say while we are on a break that you wouldn't get an episode of Doctor Who where he has his hair cut or goes down Aldi and buys the groceries. You wouldn't have a James Bond film where he's, you know, I don't know, gone in the garage to have his tires changed. You need to think something needs to happen in the story to make it a story. And sci-fi is like I said, it's a free pass to your imagination.
Yeah, with realistic characters as well.
Yeah, you've got to try and make the characters believable, and and basing the book. The first book's based in the 1950s, and I thought that was a good time because it tied you to a lot of analog stuff, and simplified the world a little bit, and made things. For people to do things, made it a little bit harder for them to find out stuff and do stuff. The second book is basically only set now about 6 or 7 years away from where we are now. So I didn't have futuristic cities, 1,000 years time. So I didn't have flying cars or jet belts or whatever might be around. I basically grounded it in something where you could use today's technology with basically just a few changes or very little change to get into the book, but far enough away from where the original characters were for them to be out of time.
So I've got to ask this question: is there going to be a fourth book?
I would say no, but you should never say never. I don't know if I write a fourth book, I don't know if it will be, if I think of a story where I use the same characters, or whether I actually go and do something different and push myself. I'd have to find, I need to find a subject where I think that I could do something interesting. But that's the same, whether other people think that the other books are interesting. I don't know. It's just, that's a personal thing. You obviously, you've written something you think is good, but whether to the general population, people that read a lot of books, whether they think it's good or not, or interesting enough, I don't know. I can't say that. I can only go by some of the people that have read it and what they've said.
And reviews. Well, let's look forward to Netflix picking it up as a mini series, because I think it would work as a mini series myself.
I think it would be too long. Even the first book I think would be too, unless you really chop bits out of it, would be too long for a movie.
I think it'd make not a movie, miniseries.
Yeah,
a
but I mean,
miniseries
if
for the
you
three.
if you used all three books together, because they are basically one long story
yeah.
with obviously different trajectories, but they would work as one. It's like you said, if you made a mini series or a limited series.
Well, I look forward to seeing it when it comes out. Robert, it's been absolutely fantastic speaking with you. Thank you for spending your time with us. It's nice to talk to an accomplished author that still believes he's a novice. I mean, it's fresh and it's wonderful to have spent this time with you. So thank you very much.
Accomplished is somebody's opinion. Other people might not share that, and time will tell whether people think it is or not.
Well,
and thank you for having me. It's been
no worries.
a joy.
To all the listeners out there, all the links to Bob's books will be in the information at the bottom of the podcasts. And thank you for your time, Bob.
Thank you very much.
So please remember to subscribe and like us and share this podcast with anybody you feel that would benefit from it.